Hello everyone, I am back in my normal recording position, so hopefully the sound for this intro and outro will be better than the last. My sore throat that I attributed to my karaoke session on the way down to the hotel last week turned into a full-blown cold. So if I sound a bit phlegmy, I apologise. Things just keep happening. But we crack on. If you're into naughty fairies, self-loathing, and endings that don't exactly sparkle, you might enjoy this one. I've linked the original story in the description below, so if you do enjoy it, please consider heading over and giving the author a little upvote. I'm also joined by two very talented narrators who some of you will already know. We have Keeper, who joined me on the audience at my new gig Never Claps, and he voices the main character and Barry in this story. We also have Bert Catboy, who I have been a fan of for a while, and when you hear her voice Gwen, you probably will too. This is also my first time using YouTube's collab feature, and I am really happy that it's with these two incredibly supportive and talented creators. So thanks guys. This one is a long one, so when you're ready to settle in for a fairy tale with a less than happy ending, grab a coffee and try this one. Enjoy. I took up smoking last month. Why the hell not at this point? What exactly was I trying to stay alive and healthy for? That sounds dramatic, I know, but really, the fucking year I've had. If you'd been there, you'd understand. It started with my mum dying last January, the only family I had left. She was 56, in perfect health, but that doesn't matter when some arsehole decides to drive himself home after one too many beers. He walked away with just a couple of scratches, by the way. So fucked up how that always seems to happen. He spent 6 months in jail, and now he's out on probation. I still can't get my head around it. How is that fair? What the fuck was that judge thinking? I fell into a depressive fugue state after that. Slept all day, played video games all night, stopped talking to people. My boss extended me as much bereavement leave as he could, but eventually he fired me after I stopped showing up and answering his calls. Can't blame him, really. My girlfriend put up with me longer than I probably deserved. I guess she figured it'd be pretty shitty to leave a guy for being sad his mum died. But it became too much, she said, and like the arsehole I am, I refused to go to therapy like she asked. She said she couldn't help me if I wouldn't help myself, and she walked away. That was 3 months ago, and I haven't heard from her since. The unemployment check stopped not long after that, so I had to take a much shittier job a few towns over and move into a perpetually damp basement apartment. My friends started drifting out of my life once I no longer lived close. And my car crapped out, so now I have to walk half an hour to the nearest bus stop before the sun comes up to get to work or the grocery store or literally anywhere. What else? I saw a mouse in my apartment a few days ago, and I'm sure there are more where that came from. My shower has mould creeping up the corners that no amount of bleach will get rid of. My boots keep letting water in, and I can't figure out where from or afford to replace them. If I had a dog, I'm sure it would have run away by now. Anyway, that's enough of my sob story. Suffice it to say, everything sucked. Every single day I got up and only did the stuff I needed to stay alive, and even that had started to feel pointless. And that's where the cigarettes came in. They didn't exactly make me happy, but they dulled the pain enough that I just kept going. One day I was sitting at my desk, bullshitting my way through some spreadsheet or something. I don't even remember. And Susan, oh man, I forgot to tell you about her. She had this god-awful, high-pitched voice, the most grating laugh I've ever heard, and she did this obnoxious throat-clearing thing every 10 seconds that made me want to smash her face in. No. You know what? Never mind. It doesn't matter. So, Susan was clearing her throat even more than usual, and I'd forgotten my noise-cancelling headphones at home. Barry was whistling away at the desk next to mine. It was driving me up the wall. I felt I was going to punch a hole right through my desk any second. So I went for a smoke break. Technically, we weren't supposed to smoke at all on company property, so I went around back where there were no windows. I had to stand by the dumpsters, but it was better than walking all the way down the street to the park. There was a patch of trees behind the building. Nothing much, just went back maybe a quarter mile until you got to the highway on the other side. I was standing there, staring at it, not really thinking about anything, just trying to regain my cool before I went back inside. As I was about to toss the cigarette and get back to work, I noticed something. It hadn't been there before, I was sure of it. I'd never seen it on any of the dozens of smoke breaks I'd taken back there. It was a trail. Why would anyone even put a trail back there? Who would want to hike in a sad patch of trees by the highway? But there it was. The trees around it were bare, their leaves having fallen and started to rot on the ground weeks ago, but not on the trail. It was coated with a layer of yellow and orange leaves, golden bright like they'd just fallen. A few still clung to the branches overhanging it. I knew it was weird. A trail that shouldn't be there could not lead to anything good. But something about it drew me in. I can't explain it, but I just felt like if I followed it, I would find hope at the other end. I'd had so little of that the past year that I just couldn't make myself turn away. So I followed it. The leaves were just starting to turn crisp. They had that satisfying crunch when I stepped on them. As I walked, a few more leaves dropped gently from their branches and fluttered down to the ground. The further I went though, the fewer leaves I saw on the ground. More and more of them were in the trees, creating a golden canopy overhead. I noticed then that I couldn't hear any cars. The noise should have been getting louder as I walked toward the highway, but it just wasn't there at all. No faint odour of exhaust either. I kept walking, and the leaves went from golden to a brilliant green. Some of the trees grew fruit or flowers. The bright colours, the birds singing, the sun shining gently through the trees. I know it sounds stupid, but I felt like I was walking through a fairy tale. I don't know how long I walked, long past the point where I should have encountered the highway. I knew I should turn around and go back, but I just couldn't. Wherever this trail was taking me, it had to be better than my life back there. I had to find the end of it. Eventually, the trail opened up into a clearing. Wherever this was, it was far away from the freezing, wet, dying transition from fall into winter that I had left behind. Here, it was mid-spring. Morning. Soft golden light poured down from overhead. Dew coated each blade of grass. Birds sang, bugs hummed. And in front of me was a house. Not a log cabin or anything you'd expect to find deep in the woods. It was cute, colourful. A heavy wooden door was set into the clapboard walls. Intricately carved scrollwork ran along the roof, which was covered in multicoloured tiles. Somehow, it worked. None of it clashed, it just made sense. In front of the house were 10 or 12 garden beds, each overflowing with herbs and fruits and vegetables. As I got closer, I realised that none of the plants were familiar. I saw what I thought were little red and orange peppers, but they grew in a double helix shape, wrapping around themselves until they came to a fine point. There was a fruit that looked like a tornado from far away, but closer up I saw that it had burst open, its blue insides spilling out. Some kind of herb grew next to it. Tiny, three-pointed leaves with little pink flowers growing out of the middle. I reached out a hand to touch it.
Can I help you?
I fell backward and scrambled away, looking around wildly for the speaker. It was a woman in her 50s. She was wearing overalls and thick gardening gloves, auburn hair streaked with silver poured over her shoulders. She smiled down at me like I was an old friend she hadn't seen in a while. She pulled off her gloves and reached her hand out to help me up. I took it. Her grasp was soft and gentle, but I felt an unexpected strength behind it when she hauled me to my feet.
So, what brings you to my neck of the woods?
There was a slight southern twang to her voice, just like my mum had.
There is a trail and I just walked.
She gave a quick nod.
There are a few ways to get here, but I think that way's my favorite. It's peaceful, solitary.
I nodded, despite my confusion. What other ways was she talking about?
You got a name?
Oh, yes.
I said. She raised her eyebrows.
And that would be?
Nathan.
How had I forgotten to say it before? Something about this woman's presence was throwing me off.
Hello, Nathan. I'm Gwen. Welcome to my humble abode.
Suddenly, I realised that I shouldn't be here. I was trespassing, and I was ridiculously late for getting back to work.
I'm so sorry to intrude. I'll just get going,
I said, turning around. Gwen grasped my hand again.
Nonsense. What kind of barbarian do you take me for? You're my guest, and you're welcome here. Come on inside, and I'll get you something to eat.
I appreciate it, but I've really got to get back to...
I insist.
She turned and walked towards the door, and I followed. I wasn't ready to leave this place yet. Inside, she sat me down at a long wooden dining table. The ground floor was a single room, small but cozy and inviting. Big armchairs piled with mismatched pillows and blankets, a big fireplace, stacks of old books along the walls. In the kitchen area, the shelves were crowded with jars full of herbs, dried mushrooms, and a bunch of things I didn't recognize. A huge cast iron pot was boiling away on the ancient-looking stove. It was a lot like the one my grandma had when she was alive. Gwen set a mug of tea down in front of me. It didn't smell like regular tea, like Lipton or whatever. It was somehow sweet and savoury at the same time. I could see some tea leaves still floating around at the bottom, plus some of those tiny pink flowers.
Well, go on. Drink.
I raised the mug to my lips and took a sip. Instantly, I felt the tension go out of me, a calm settle over my mind. I'd been walking around angry all this time, and now it was like I was incapable of feeling anger. I could hardly even remember what it felt like. She pushed a tray of cookies toward me and I didn't hesitate. I gobbled up so many, so fast, without thinking. By the time I stopped, I was pretty mortified by how I must look to her. But she just gave me that warm smile again, like she couldn't be happier I was enjoying her food. And holy shit, was I enjoying it. I don't know what was in those cookies, but they were the most delicious I've ever had. Sugary sweet, but not cloying. They made me feel full in a way I hadn't for a long time. Not the I ate too much and now I'm dying full, but full in my soul. That makes me sound like an arsehole, but it's true. Mum dying had hollowed me out, and I'd been desperately trying to fill that hole with rage and despair, but instead of filling me up, it just made me hungrier. Now it was like I was whole again, and until that moment, I hadn't realised how empty I felt before. To my horror, I felt myself start to cry.
Sorry.
I said, looking down and trying to wipe my face clean, but the tears kept coming.
I don't know why.
I think you do. Don't you want to let it out?
I did. I really, really did. And once I started talking, I couldn't stop. I told her about thoughts and feelings I wouldn't have dreamed of telling anyone else if I'd had anyone else to tell them to. But it felt safe to do this here. I told her everything. About the dark place I'd been since my mum died, and then Alyssa left, the way my life had fallen apart. I even told her about Susan and her goddamn throat thing. By the end of this speech, my heart was racing and I was breathing hard. Gwen just watched me for a while.
Sounds like you've been through an awful lot.
Yeah, I guess so.
And how much of it, exactly, do you think was caused by your self-pity?
I started at that, sloshing lukewarm tea down my chin.
What?
Because I'd say almost all of it.
I was stunned at this sudden turn. She'd been nothing but warm and supportive until now.
My mom...
What happened to your mother was awful. A tragedy. And the depression, well, that was bound to happen. But everything after that? Sounds like you just sat back and watched it happen. Left your life up to the fates. And any old thing that tried to claw its way into your heart while you were walking around empty.
What was I supposed to do?
Your girlfriend handed you the answer on a silver platter. You let her walk away anyway.
I didn't really think she'd leave over it.
And after she left, did you start therapy then?
I didn't see the point. She was already gone.
The point is, if you'd gone, you might not be living in your rundown apartment and working a job you hate. Maybe you'd have a few new friends by now. Or a new lady in your life.
I felt like I should be angry, but I wasn't. Mostly I just felt sad, guilty, because she was right.
I should have, I guess.
And if you know that, why aren't you going now?
Can't afford it. My job has shitty insurance.
Well, I've got some good news for you,
she said with a grin.
Talking to me is free, and you're welcome back here anytime.
You're a therapist?
She laughed hard at that.
Oh, honey, no. But I do make an incredible brown butter pie, and that's almost as good.
My spirits started to rise again.
That's my favorite.
Mine too.
There was a long silence.
I don't even know where to start.
You start small. If you set out to fix it all at once, you'll get overwhelmed and fail. Pick one thing that feels doable, and make a change. It can be anything.
I nodded, now lost in thought, sifting through all the things that were wrong in my life and what I could do about them. But there were so many, it was hard to choose. I started to reach for another cookie, but suddenly became aware of how much time had passed there.
Oh no. Oh shit, sorry.
I said, as she raised her eyebrows at my foul language.
I should have been back at work like 2 hours ago. I can't lose this job.
I wouldn't worry. I've got a feeling you'll make it back all right. Come with me. I'll show you a shortcut.
We went back outside toward the tree line, and Gwen pointed vaguely into the trees, told me to follow the path, that I couldn't miss it. But I couldn't see a path. I turned around to ask her to point it out again, but she was gone, like she'd just vanished from the spot. I took a few steps into the trees, figuring the path might be more obvious once I was inside. It wasn't. In fact, it was so dark in there I could hardly see anything at all. I tried to go back, but the clearing was gone. It got darker and darker with every step I took. And then, just as panic was about to set in, I was sitting at my desk. The spreadsheet I'd been working on was open in front of me. Barry was whistling the exact same tune as when I'd left for my smoke break. Had I fallen asleep? Had it all been a weird dream? As soon as the thought crossed my mind, I knew it wasn't true. I still had that full feeling from the tea and cookies. There were even a couple of stray crumbs on the collar of my shirt. I checked the time. Only 10 minutes had passed since I'd stepped outside to smoke. How could that be right?
Hey, Barry. I have kind of a weird question.
I said. Barry stopped whistling and looked up from the crossword puzzle he'd been working on.
How long was I away from my desk?
Barry's forehead scrunched up in confusion.
Oh, I don't know. 10, 15 minutes, like usual.
And how long ago did I get back to my seat?
Now he was starting to look genuinely worried about me.
Just now. Maybe 30 seconds ago. Do you not remember?
Don't worry about it. It's just been a weird day.
If you say so.
He went back to his puzzle, but I sensed that he was watching me out of the corner of his eye. I tried to go over the events of that morning in my mind, but it was making my head spin. Nothing that happened made any sense. I was starting to realize how stupid I had been to just wander down a random path to a place that physically could not have existed. I needed something else to focus on. Nothing to do at my desk but work, so I got back to it. It was weird. Never in my life had I worked that hard for that long. The work was still boring and kind of pointless, but I just kept going. Every time I felt like stopping, like this was stupid and I'd rather be doing anything else, something in me just powered through. Yeah, it was bullshit, but I was never going to get anywhere better by slacking off. Stupid, pointless tasks are the key to success, I guess. By the time I had finished, it was well past dark. Most of the offices had their lights off, and only a few people were milling around. I looked at my phone, 5:46 p.m.
Fucking fuck.
Something the matter?
He had stood up and was pulling his coat on.
I missed my bus. My options are wait an hour for the next one, or spend half of this day's pay on an Uber.
I've got a third option for you,
said Barry.
I can give you a ride.
I stared at him, surprised.
Are you sure? I don't want you to go out of your way.
How do you know you're out of my way?
I live in Grantwood. It's out of everyone's way.
Barry chuckled.
Well, I don't mind. I like driving around, and I don't get out that way much.
Well, okay. If you really don't mind.
Hurry up, or I'm leaving without you,
Barry said, but then he laughed and waited for me by the door while I packed up. The drive wasn't nearly as awkward as I expected. Barry's music was bad, and the car smelled kind of funky, but at least he knew when to talk and when to just let the silence be. A lot of the people who take my bus could learn a thing or two from Barry. By the time he dropped me off, I felt much lighter than I usually do after work. Normally, I just want to eat a frozen pizza and go to bed, but I felt like maybe tonight I'd actually cook and maybe read a book or something. My mood soured as soon as I opened my apartment door and the damp smell washed over me. Back to reality, I guess. Still, I at least made myself a sandwich instead of a frozen meal. I even put some vegetables in it. The next morning, it was back to the bus. I could feel the misery starting to creep back in. I tried to shake it off as I walked into the office, to have a positive outlook, but I swear to God, the instant I walked past Susan's desk and she did that throat-clearing thing again, it just shattered my will to have a good day. That place fucking sucked and there was no way around it. Barry smiled and greeted me as I approached my desk, but I barely managed a terse hey before I sank back into my seat and switched my computer on. Barry looked taken aback but didn't say anything, just went back to work. I felt a twinge of guilt at that, but not enough to apologise. I spent maybe an hour working on another pointless task before I couldn't stand Susan anymore. I got up and basically half ran to the bathroom just so I could have some peace and quiet just for a few minutes. Get my thoughts in order. I yanked open the door, and by the time I realised there was a dark, empty void in front of me, I'd already stepped through and started falling. I don't know how long I fell exactly. It was probably just a few seconds, but it felt longer, like months or even years. I landed hard on a wooden floor. Groaning, I pushed myself up into a sitting position so I could look around. The cottage. I was back.
Hello there.
Said Gwen. She was crouched down, loading something into the oven.
You find another way here? What was it?
Some kind of void?
I rose slowly to my feet. Gwen slammed the oven shut and stood.
That one takes some getting used to. It's alright after a while, though, once you learn how to land on your feet.
How did I didn't do this on purpose this time.
After you make it here the first time, it gets easier. You don't have to decide to do it, you just have to want it.
It wasn't making a lot of sense to me, but then again I was still recovering from that fall.
I'd ask how you've been, but the fact that you're back here tells me the answer is not so great.
Yeah, that about covers it.
What's troubling you?
I sat down at the table, and Gwen was already placing another cup of tea in front of me. It was sweet this time, like apples with cinnamon.
I think I might be broken.
Gwen raised her eyebrows.
Whatever you did to help me last time, it didn't last. I had an okay afternoon. Things were starting to look up, just a little. But one little thing goes wrong and I just lose it.
There's our self-pity again. Things just happened to you. What did you do about it?
I shrugged.
That's what I thought.
What can I do? Where do I start?
Gwen smiled, and for the first time I felt unsettled in her presence, like I had walked into a trap. The warm, welcoming smile was gone, replaced by a wicked grin. Her face was harsh, all sharp angles and shadows. I leaned away from her, unnerved. Suddenly her face softened, settling back into the usual cheerful expression. She slid a plate of pastries across to me. I took one and bit into it. A sense of ease washed over me, erasing my fear.
You've got to get to the root of your problems. Dig deep.
This all started with my mom dying. I can't bring her back.
No, you can't. But there are other things you could try.
Like what?
I nodded as I shoved the last bit of the pastry into my mouth.
Good. It's time for you to go.
What?
But I was already gone. The room fell away and I was in the void again. Next thing I knew, I was crashing into the bathroom floor, landing hard on my hands and knees. I took a minute to scan under the stalls. No one was there, so that was something at least. Still in a daze, I brushed myself off and made my way back to my desk. I blazed through my work like the day before, but it was different this time. Instead of feeling energized, it was like I was in a fog, like I wasn't really thinking, just doing. I was barely even aware of what I was typing. A couple of hours had passed by the time I was jolted out of this state by someone standing in front of me, talking. With sudden dread, I realized it was my boss, probably chewing me out for something or other. I'd missed everything he'd said so far. But now that I was finally tuning in, I realized it wasn't that. The opposite, actually. He was praising my work from the day before, saying if I kept it up, I'd be looking at a raise in 6 months, maybe a promotion in a year. I nodded and thanked him before he walked away, but I couldn't really absorb what had happened, partly because of the fog settling back in, but also because I'd never been the kind of person who got raises, and especially not promotions. Before my mum died, I just kind of floated from job to job, Doing well enough not to get fired, but never enough to stand out. That was the way I liked it. That's what I told myself, anyway. I kept working in that fog until I noticed Barry talking to me, offering me a ride. The whole way home, I could hear Barry talking, trying to make conversation, but the fog was just getting worse and I barely understood him. I just nodded along and smiled now and then and hoped he wouldn't notice how out of it I was. By the time he dropped me off, I was basically falling asleep. I gave him a slurred goodbye and stumbled to my apartment. Not sure I was going to make it until I was sliding the key into the lock. I didn't even bother to eat, just crashed on my bed and was out instantly. The next morning, I was somehow even more tired, despite the 10 hours of sleep. I felt heavy, like I was sinking down into the earth. Somehow, I made it to work. I am not normally a coffee person, but I was mainlining the break room sludge that day. I added a lot of sugar to mask the taste, but it actually made it worse. Slowly, the caffeine brought me back to my senses. Then I realised the heaviness I'd been feeling was pain. My muscles, all of them, but especially my arms and shoulders were aching like I'd spent the whole night lifting weights instead of sleeping. I was pretty sure I had bruises too, all over, but I wasn't about to check in the middle of the office, and the thought of going back into that bathroom made me nauseous. I took so many smoke breaks that day, hoping the path would appear to me again, and that Gwen would have some kind of tea or cake or whatever to ease the pain, but nothing. I was almost tempted to try the bathroom void again, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. By the time 5:30 rolled around, I was desperate to be anywhere but there, even my crappy apartment. As I waited for Barry to finish up the last of his tasks, I switched my phone back on. What I saw stopped me in my tracks. First, 9 texts from a friend I hadn't spoke to in months. Next, the content of those texts. It was about the driver who killed my mum. He was missing, and there were signs of a disturbance at his house. Despite hours of searching, the cops had no idea where he'd gone or who might be responsible. I just sat there, numb. It was weird. I felt like I should have been happy, or at least relieved, that this guy may have finally faced justice in some form. I should have felt something, right? But I was just blank for a long time. As Barry drove me home, a feeling did start to form, just not the one I expected. Dread. It started out as just an itch in the back of my head, but it expanded and expanded until I was full with it, until I wanted to punch the hell out of Barry's radio just to make his shitty Christian rock stop. I wanted to scream at him, ask him what that fucking smell was. Why did his goddamn car always smell faintly of BO? Like he hadn't showered in 3 days. How could it always smell like he hadn't showered in 3 days? I made it home, barely, and I didn't sleep. I tossed around, got tangled in my blankets, until I realised I wasn't in my bed anymore. I was cold and damp, under a thick layer of rotting leaves, gnarled tree roots digging into my back. It was too dark to see much, but I knew where I was. I knew the clearing couldn't be far.
Gwen?
I called out. The response was a soft skitter of laughter from behind me, just over my shoulder. I whipped around, but no one was there.
Where are you? What's happening?
More laughter. This time I couldn't tell from where. It was behind me, then over my head, then far off, then inside my head. I stumbled to my feet, branches scraping me, tearing at my skin. The laughter had stopped. Now it was a whispering. From all around, just soft enough that I couldn't hear the words. It was so dark I couldn't see more than 2 or 3 feet in front of my face. But I had to get out of there, so I took a cautious step forward, and I was stumbling off the bus in front of my office. I stood there in shock for a minute before the cold started to eat at me, and then I rushed inside. I looked down. Somehow I had gotten dressed. The clothes were crumpled and a couple of shirt buttons were undone, and I had no coat, but at least I hadn't shown up in my underwear. I straightened myself up as best I could and tried to walk into the office like everything was normal. Susan gasped when she saw me. It was the least annoying sound she'd ever made. What happened? I caught sight of my reflection in the window behind her desk. My clothes were mostly fine, but my face was scratched up and blotchy with dirt.
A cat?
A cat? Susan stared at me, her mouth hanging open ever so slightly.
An angry cat?
I said, pissed at myself for not coming up with a better lie. You were attacked by an angry cat. She stared at me like I had just said something unimaginably stupid, which I guess I had, but I couldn't take it back now.
Yes, I need to go clean up.
I left before she could say anything else. I paused outside of the bathroom for a second before I shoved my way through the door. My face was a mess and my hands weren't much better. I washed up as much as I could, but the scrapes still looked pretty gnarly. It was bad enough that I considered taking a sick day, but I only got 5 of those a year. Plus, I was already here, and I had no desire to spend more time in my crappy apartment, which was also now apparently a portal to hell. So I went back to my desk and kept my face pointed directly at my computer screen. Barry tried to talk to me a few times, but I brushed him off. It would be the bus that night for me, I guessed. The fog was back, and I was struggling to pay attention to anything happening around me. I never got up from my desk, but I think I maybe got 5 minutes of work done the whole day. By the time I packed up my desk and left, it was dark and freezing outside. Clumps of wet, heavy snow pelted me all over, and without my thick winter coat, my clothes were soaked through pretty fast. I stood at the bus stop, shivering hard, the wet cold sharp against my skin. The bus was late, and yet I was still the only person standing here, a lone figure under the dull light of the street lamp, surrounded by darkness. I was about to descend into a spiral of self-pity about that, until I heard the noise behind me, the quiet clacking of heels on pavement, and then I whipped around before I could even think about it, and thrust my open hand toward the noise, and my fingers wrapped around Susan's soft, fleshy neck, and I pushed. I sat at Gwen's kitchen table. It felt like no time had passed since I was at the bus stop, but my clothes were completely dry and my scratches were healing. The sun was setting. Outside looked cold, but in here it was cozy. There was a fire crackling away in the fireplace. I had a blanket over my shoulders and a steaming cup of tea in front of me. Gwen was roasting something rich and savoury in the old-fashioned oven.
Ah, Nathan, you're back with us.
Gwen sat across from me, chopping up some of those vegetables I'd seen in her garden.
What's going on? How did I get here?
You've been sitting here a while, but your mind was somewhere else. Seems it's finally caught up.
She hadn't answered either of my questions.
Where is Susan? Is she okay?
I asked.
Don't you worry about that. She's not your problem anymore.
What? What does that mean?
Gwen shrugged, eyes still pointed down at the vegetables.
I told you I'd help you take care of your problems. Seems only fair you help me with mine, don't you think?
There was a hissing sound from inside the oven, fat dripping down and sizzling on the searing hot metal. I stared straight into her eyes, waiting for her to say more, but she didn't.
That. The guy who killed my mom. That was you too, wasn't it? Or me. Us.
Gwen smiled slightly, still said nothing.
Why is this happening?
I told you the first time we met. It's dangerous to go through life just letting things happen to you. To become an empty shell leaves room for all kinds of things to seep in.
What are you?
What do you think I am?
Shadows grew up around her, emphasizing her sharp edges, the hollow places beneath her cheeks, the emptiness in her eyes. I didn't want to say it. Despite everything that had been happening, I felt so stupid even thinking it. But Gwen was waiting. So I blurted it out as fast as I could.
Are you a witch?
She stared silently at me for a long time. So long, I almost thought she hadn't heard me. Then she threw back her head and cackled.
A witch! I suppose I could see why you'd think so. But no, Nathan. I am nothing so pedestrian as that.
Then what?
Gwen's face split into a grin. Too wide. Too many teeth. And the world went dark around us. No, not just dark. Gone. Like Gwen had taken the clearing with the cottage and ripped it away from the earth, the universe, entirely, and thrown it into an abyss, a horribly empty place devoid of life and light and hope. I wanted to scream, but there was no sound here except the deep, guttural groan of the blackness surrounding us. I felt my mind start to break apart, crushed under the gravity of this nowhere place, my memories and my sanity gushing out, everything that comprised my existence, rushing away, vanishing into the void. Suddenly, the abyss was gone and the world I knew was back. For a long time, I was too scared to move or speak. My existence felt fragile, like drawing attention to myself might tear me away again into the nothingness. Then Gwen spoke.
I am something far older than a witch. I am the well your witches draw from. The most powerful among them can only ever hope to skim the surface of my power, seize just a few droplets before it overwhelms them.
For fuck's sake, would you just say,
I am of the Fae.
I stared at her, utterly lost. Gwen rolled her eyes.
More commonly known these days as a fairy.
a fairy? Like fucking Tinkerbell?
I am nothing like your fairy tales. You think that little pixie could do what I have done?
I wouldn't put it past her. She was kind of a bitch, too.
I suppose you have a point.
And if you are so powerful, why do you need me to do your bidding? That's what I've been doing, isn't it?
My power is great, but it is tied to these woods. I cannot leave.
So just eat me then. Get over with it.
Gwen shook her head.
Not many of your kind wander here anymore. No outcast children leaving breadcrumb trails. No weary travelers looking for a safe place to rest. When I finally lure someone in, I must use them for all they're worth.
I won't do it. Not anymore.
Oh, I think you will.
I swept my arm across the table, sending my teacup crashing to the floor. It shattered there, the liquid staining the wood black.
No, I won't.
So you'll go back to your life as it was? No one left who loves you. A job you're bound to lose. A home that's slowly rotting away. I can give you more than that. Much more.
I wish I'd had the strength to stand up then, to walk out. I don't know if she'd have left me, but I should have tried. Too bad I'm a fucking coward.
Remember that first day, after you left? How things seemed like they were coming together? That was just a taste of what I can do for you. If you help me in return.
I didn't answer at first. Not for a long time.
What would I have to do?
Gwen's mouth stretched into that creepy, too wide grin. She stood and started preparing another cup of tea. Next thing I knew, I was sitting in my office chair at 9 a.m. on the dot, scanning through my emails. From the corner of my eye, I could see that Susan's desk was empty. I breezed through my tasks. I barely even remember doing them. My boss came back to my desk, said more nice things about me going places if I kept it up. Then it was dark and I was climbing into the passenger seat of Barry's car. I sorted through my personal emails as Barry got his usual playlist set up. They were mostly bullshit, except for one. An email from a company in the town where I used to live, asking me to interview for a job I didn't remember applying for. I was still trying to process this when my phone dinged. A text from Melissa. My mind reeling, I switched the screen off and put the phone back in my pocket. Then it was just me and Barry rolling along through the dark. That awful, lingering stench was still there, as always. Some horrendous Christian rock band crooned through the car's speakers. And this time, Barry sang along. That was new. His voice was off-key and horribly shrill. For fuck's sake, why was he doing this? Why couldn't he like normal music? Even fucking show tunes would be better than this. Why did this arsehole have to be so goddamn annoying? The rage came over me suddenly, before I could even register what was happening. I wanted to grab him by the hair, slam his face into the steering wheel again and again until his face was obliterated. I wanted to send the car careening off the road and into a ditch just to make it fucking stop. I held back, barely. My fist balled up tight, drawing blood from my palms. I would wait until he pulled up outside my building. I would bring him to Gwen in one piece. She needed me to do the hunting, she'd said. But she liked to butcher them fresh. Grim. I actually loved the reality check that Gwen gave the main character in this story. He was deep in this epic pity party and she was having none of it. And I love that for her. It's great. The kidnapping and eating people, not so great. But I suppose everyone has a price, right? What would you do to gain the life you've always dreamed of? Or, maybe not even that dramatic. What would you do just to avoid a shitty one? Where's your line? If you do decide to share, keep it legal in the comments. And I'll see you in the next one.